Child killer Susan Smith is days away from coming face to face with members of the parole board, and members of the public in South Carolina have something to say about her possible release. The prosecutor who put Smith away is here with the latest on the upcoming hearing. Welcome to Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Susan Smith will make her case to the South Carolina Parole Board on November 20th. And if you know anything about parole boards, you know that you can write to them, and people are writing to members of the South Carolina Parole Board to tell them what they think about the possibility that Susan Smith could be released after serving 30 years for the murders of her sons. I'm going to tell you more about people writing to the parole board shortly, so stay tuned. I really want you to hear about this. But first, a recap on how we got to this point. What Smith did is absolutely unimaginable. On October 25th, 1994, Smith was 23. She strapped her two young sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, into their car seats in the back of her red Mazda and rolled that car into John D. Long Lake. Susan Smith stood on the edge of that lake in Union County and watched as her helpless baby boys drowned. It took time. South Carolina's Law Enforcement Division would later say their experiment showed it would have taken 6 minutes for the car to sink. Susan Smith had time to rethink what she had done. And as I've told you before, she didn't. What Susan Smith did next still shocks the conscience 30 years later. She reported that a black man had carjacked her and taken her car with Michael and Alex inside. It wasn't true. It was a lie that was racist and could have put people in harm's way. For 9 days, Smith kept up the lie. The story of Michael and Alex supposedly being kidnapped made national news, and so did Susan Smith.
Whoever has my children, that they please bring them home.
And for those 9 days, Susan Smith's then estranged husband, David Smith, stood by her, consoling her, and he defended her when others questioned her story. I spoke with David Smith and his wife, Tiffany, recently.
You know, during those 9 days, my entire focus was on finding Michael and Alex and, bringing them home. Nothing else mattered to me. Because I was hearing reports that she was failing polygraph tests, and I was trying to help her, give her suggestions on how to pass a polygraph. Because I believed her 100%. So I thought she was just failing these tests because she was going through trauma herself. That Michael and Alex had been taken from her, and she was dealing with that, and she wanted them back too, just as I did. And so I was just trying to help her pass polygraphs, and I was trying to do anything humanly within my power to bring Michael and Alex back. That's all I was focused on. I didn't care about failed polygraphs. All these stories, rumors that were going on, I didn't care. I just wanted Michael and Alex back.
After 9 days, Susan Smith finally confessed to what she had done. Smith killed her little boys, Michael and Alex, for a man. It was selfish and callous, and those words are probably not even harsh enough to describe it. It was just evil. Susan Smith murdered Michael and Alex because that man, who had ended their relationship, had told her he wasn't interested in raising children. SLED agents pulled the Mazda from the lake with Michael and Alex still strapped into their car seats. Solicitor Tommy Pope sought the death penalty against Susan Smith, but the jury opted for a life sentence instead. But the law at that time was written in a way that allowed a person sentenced to life to be eligible for release after serving 30 years. David Smith plans to speak against his ex-wife's release on November 20th.
No, I do not want Susan to be released. I don't know what I'm going to even say to the parole board other than I don't want to release, but more than that, I don't know. I know I'm just going to speak from the heart and, just remind them of, most importantly, the lives that she took, but also the lives that she changed forever. All the people all the family that, she changed. I don't know if it's the right way to put it, but history for like my life, the way my life's supposed to go. She changed all that. And I want to tell the parole board, you can't let her out. I mean, she did it intentionally with malice and forethought, as they say in the courts. And 30 years is just not enough for justice for Michael and Alex. For her to come out of prison in the future would be an injustice to Michael and Alex. She needs to stay in there until she dies of natural cause or whatever. But she needs to stay there for the rest of her natural life.
So now I want to go back to what I was telling you earlier about people contacting the parole board. A spokesperson for the parole board told me the board has received 321 letters about Susan Smith's parole hearing. 319 of those call for her to remain in prison. Just 2 support Susan Smith's release. By law, South Carolina does not allow those letters to be released. The parole board will have a lot to consider when looking at whether Susan Smith should be released. The main consideration, has she been rehabilitated over the past 30 years? I want to tell you about a great free app. It's called Upside, and it will give you cash back on things that you buy all the time, like groceries and gas. This is not a confusing rewards program. Upside gives you real money back that will go straight into your bank account. Just download the Upside app and click on it and claim an offer and pay with your debit or credit card as usual. Upside works at places like Shell, Exxon, 7-Eleven, Taco Bell, KFC, and even Chipotle. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code CRIMEFIX to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code CRIMEFIX for extra cash back. I want to bring in Tommy Pope. He is that solicitor who put Susan Smith in prison for what the jurors apparently thought was going to be life in prison, but she is now eligible for parole. So, Tommy, the number one question the parole board is going to have to answer is, has Susan Smith been rehabilitated to the point where she should be released from prison? And I know what you're going to say. What is your answer?
Yes, I obviously don't think she has, based on her behavior. The jurors, actually, some of them spoke after the trial and said the reason they gave her life as opposed to the death penalty was the belief that she would spend time, remorseful for what she did, thinking of Michael and Alex and the lives she had taken. She's exhibited, in prison, whether it's sex with guards or social media accounts. Now she's got sugar daddies that want to take care of her. And just recently, was contracting or attempting to contract to somehow make money or profit from the story itself. So unfortunately, Susan is always focused on Susan, I think, from the time of the act till today. And you're exactly right. That's what I would be telling the parole board.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, the behavior in prison. Yes, she had sex with 2 prison guards. That is undisputed. And, she hadn't gotten any reprimands from 2015 until this year. And then in August of this year, she was caught, as you mentioned, communicating with a documentary film producer and having some conversations with that person. And she was told, telling this person apparently she would connect them with people involved in the case, including David Smith, which is confounding to me because David Smith told me he hasn't had contact with her in 30 years. The last time he had any contact with her was a month after her arrest. And, that's what he told me. And so it's the fact that she would even say she could connect the producer with David is interesting to me. And this person was putting money on her books. And so she's had a reprimand. She's had an infraction and she's been disciplined for that. So she lost canteen privileges for 90 days and tablet privileges. So it seems to me she almost, sounds like she almost thought she was readying for her release. Like maybe she thought she was getting out and she was going to do a movie.
I actually had one of the media groups that had come and interviewed me, played for me some tapes from some guys that are, having phone conversations with her from outside that talk about saving money up for her and taking care of her. And I'm sure for her, it's very exciting to have this much attention. She embraced the attention for that 9 days, and it only got difficult for her when people like you started asking the hard questions instead of just being supportive. And so Susan is, histrionic. She's always the princess of the victim, and I think, she is proving to us right here at the worst possible time for her that she hasn't changed. And, going to David, the story that I always want to be told, I tell people, we didn't have cameras in the courtroom. If a prosecutor acts like he wants cameras, then I'm a glory hound. If I don't want cameras, I have something to hide. But I always wanted people to hear David Smith's story, because ethically, we couldn't tell that story. We heard about poor Susan out in the media, but you couldn't hear what David suffered through, what those boys suffered through. And so the story that needs to be told isn't Susan. She loves when it's about Susan. The story to be told is David Smith and the fight he's had for this 30 years. And he and Tiffany and the good days and the bad days. And, we always say that, let's focus on the victims. But, he's had a tough row, and I think he's handled it well.
He really has. He really has. And we spoke with him a few weeks back, and, just what he's gone through. And it's just been horrible. And he was supportive of her during those 9 days. That's the worst part, too, is that he believed her. So she's going to be able to speak in front of the parole board. David, he doesn't want her to get out. He said that very clearly to me, and he doesn't know what he's going to say, but he's going to speak from the heart when he speaks in front of the parole board. You have the opportunity to speak when this hearing happens on the 20th. What are you going to say to the parole board?
So mine is fairly straightforward. Actually, I don't want to eat up all, of the airtime, because I think, as you just said, David speaking from the heart, his faith, the things that have brought him through. I think he's classy in the way he's forgiven her, because as a Christian, that's, absolutely what he feels he needs to do, but still feels she needs to be justly punished. As far as my part, really, it's twofold. It's, I believe in truth in sentencing. The jury believed that she received life. And so I want the parole board to basically enforce that sentence, coupled with Susan, the theme that we kind of started with. Susan hadn't learned her lesson. Susan is still about Susan, and doesn't deserve to get out.
I reached out to the parole board this week, and, I reached out to them back in August, and I asked in August, has anybody written to the board? And they said, no, we've received no correspondence. Well, as of this week, the board has received 321 pieces of correspondence. Out of that 321, the board tells me 319 pieces of the correspondence oppose her release, to support her release. So that's interesting to me, because I feel like in South Carolina in particular, and we can't read these letters, they're private by law. Like, unfortunately, we can't. I want to read them, but I can't.
Sure.
To support her release. So this is still very raw in South Carolina. Just the fact that she blamed a black man. This was like a racist thing that was conjured up in the conscience of the public, and it was a national story. This is still a very raw story 30 years later.
Sure. I think a couple things. I think one, and I want to give Union credit, at the time, it could have been explosively racist, in the way the community handled it. One lady, an African-American lady, said it best. They said, well, what do you feel about the community blaming a black man? And she said, the community didn't blame a black man. Susan Smith did. So the community was very good, even here in the Deep South, of focusing that this was her acts and her conduct. And so I think that, as far as the opposition, I think Union is weary of being the place where Susan Smith killed Michael and Alex. I think Union wants to move on. That's every time these people travel or they say, I'm from Union, isn't that the place where the woman killed the kid? So I think Union doesn't want Susan coming back, so you have that component. I think Susan drew in so many people. And, Michael and Alex became our children that were missing. We saw their faces. She begged us to help her find them. And, you were just, your heart was torn. When you then find that betrayal has occurred, I think it amplifies the grief, it amplifies the loss. And I think people, feel, again, betrayed by her and have less sympathy than you may in other circumstances. The defense always claimed it was a botched suicide. Well, I argued if she stopped the car for her, she could have stopped the car for the kids. If she had changed her mind, she'd been wet, her clothes had been torn, something. If she had run to that house and said, I did a horrible thing, I wasn't thinking, I rolled the kids down the lake, you and I would never be talking about this. There would be some mitigation in this case, but there's not. And it all comes back to Susan and her focus and her selfishness. And I think the people want to see justice served.
Yeah. And there was time for the boys to be saved. I mean, it took time for that car to sink.
About 6 minutes,
Yeah,
6 minutes. And, and we always say that lies are the best lies are coupled with the truth. I remember one time watching a video, where she'd close her eyes and just start telling you, she said, and the boys were just crying for me as the carjacker drove off. Well, I think the boys were crying for her as she rolled them in the lake.
Mm. Oh my God, it's just horrible. It's just absolutely awful to think about. Michael and Alex are the victims here, and David and Tiffany want them to be remembered, and they often get lost in this. I mean, they're frozen in time. I mean, they are, as Tiffany says, forever 3 and 14 months old, and we just have these photographs of them. I mean, that's all that's left. And David said he really barely has memories of them because it's been so traumatic. It's almost like a defense mechanism, a coping mechanism for him. So
I think that's exactly right.
These sweet little boys, that's you see their photos, but it gets lost in all of this talk about sugar daddies and sex with jail guards and documentaries. I mean, that's what really matters here. It's very sad. So you'll be speaking. This current solicitor will be speaking. We know David will be speaking. Your prediction, because it seems so rare to me that people get parole on the first go around anyway.
I think you're right. As time has evolved, we've gotten closer to the actual hearing. It is probably rare. Of course, I knew it was rare that a woman would receive the death penalty, but I felt strongly, based on all the things we've discussed, that she deserved the same thing that the black man would have gotten or David would have gotten. And so I always say I've had jurors nod at me and then come back with not guilty, so you never know. But my gut tells me she won't be getting out this time. The unfortunate thing for David, particularly, and Tiffany, is the nature of the system is this will be repeated, whether it's 2 years or whatever, area, however often they let her come back for parole, this will be repeated again and again and again for a long, long time, as long as they don't let her out.
Mm-hmm. And it will. And it's so sad that they're going to have to go through this over and over again. So we will look toward the 20th and see what happens and what is said. Thank you so much, Tommy Pope. We appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Take care.
So right now, I want to take a little bit of a look at more of what David Smith told me a couple of weeks ago.
Well, first of all, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of memories of Michael and Alex. I was told by, counselors and stuff that was my body's way of defending itself, that it would be too traumatic maybe for me to remember them at the time, but that eventually over time, those memories would come back. But unfortunately, they haven't. But I do know that Michael was very protective of Alex. especially at like the daycare where they stayed. If someone would take a toy from Alex, Michael would get it back. He would get that toy back for Alex. Alex, he was more of you kind of, I would say like you rough and tumble little boy. He loved to play a lot, which Michael did too, but Alex was different, and he liked to just get in the floor and just roll around. Michael was a little more, I don't know the right word, but
Timid.
yes, timid. If he fell down outside, he would wipe his knees off. He'd wipe his hands off. He didn't like to be dirty. So, yeah, they were different in their own ways. He was kind of held, he was more restrained. And
So, David, you've kind of, as a coping mechanism, blocked out your memories of your two boys because of the pain that you went through in losing them.
that's correct. And I wish so much I could have more memories of them. I mean, I really, honestly, I only have a few like snippets, snapshots of them in my head, and it's very few. All the 3 years with Michael and the 14 months with Alex, 15 months with Alex is just gone in my head. And I wish it would come back. And maybe it will one day, but it hasn't yet.
In the end, David Smith wants people to remember what truly matters in this case, his two young sons.
I would just like to re-emphasize that for people to remember who the victims were. It sure wasn't Susan, or isn't Susan. And I guess people look at me as a victim, and I can see that in a way, but still, I'm more about Michael and Alex. I want people to remember that she took those little boys' lives, and just think of them and the ultimate price that they had to pay because of her actions. Life is one of the greatest gifts that we're given. And she took those away, and she had no right to do that. So I just would like the public to not, when they think about Michael and Alex and all the story and all the events, I want them to smile, though, when they see a picture of Michael and Alex or something. Not be sad. Smile. They were beautiful little boys who had a whole life ahead of them. And just smile for them. Don't be sad.
And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.